acknowledged.
Deep in Colombia, a young boy named Pablo Escobar dreamed of a bigger life than the one he had. Growing up in the rural town of Rio Negro, he was surrounded by the simplicity of village life, yet even as a child he felt a burning desire for something more. He would often gaze at the distant mountains, imagining the world beyond his reach. He wanted power, money, and to be important. The bustling marketplaces and the old Colombian currency fascinated him. He saw the traders and merchants, and he knew that wealth could bring influence. He would listen to the stories of the rich and powerful, dreaming of the day he could be one of them. He didn't know then that wanting these things so much would one day cause a lot of violence and corruption in his country. As he grew older, his ambitions only intensified. The news clippings of the 1960s showed a country in turmoil, and young Pablo saw opportunities where others saw chaos. He began to understand that power could be seized, not just earned. This is the story of how a regular kid became one of the most famous criminals ever. From playing with friends in the dusty streets to becoming a feared name, Escobar's journey is a complex tale of ambition, cunning, and ruthlessness. His early years were marked by a keen intelligence and a willingness to take risks. Escobar's story isn't just about one man, it's connected to what was happening in Colombia in the middle of the 1900s. The political rallies and street scenes of the time paint a picture of a nation grappling with change. Economic disparities and social unrest created an environment where someone like Escobar could rise to power. To understand how he became so powerful, we have to look at what was going on in Colombia back then. The 1960s and 1970s were decades of significant upheaval. The economic conditions were harsh and the cities were growing rapidly. Amidst this backdrop, Escobar's ambitions found fertile ground. His story is intertwined with the history of Colombia, a country that was both his playground and his battleground. In 1948, Colombia was split in two. The country was in the midst of a significant political crisis that would shape its future for decades to come. The assassination of Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, a popular liberal leader, acted as a catalyst, plunging the nation into chaos and violence. Two big political groups, the liberals and the conservatives, were fighting for control, and sometimes that fighting got violent. The streets of Colombia turned into battlegrounds, with both sides unwilling to back down. The violence was not just limited to the cities. It spread to rural areas, affecting countless lives. This time was called La Violencia, and it caused a lot of problems in Colombia. The period lasted for over a decade, from 1948 to 1958, and resulted in the deaths of an estimated 200,000 people. Families were torn apart, and entire communities were displaced. It made it easy for lawbreakers and people like Pablo Escobar to gain power. The lawlessness of the era provided fertile ground for criminal enterprises to flourish. Escobar, who would later become one of the world's most notorious drug lords, began his rise during the chaotic period. The liberals, mostly working-class people, wanted changes to help the poor. They sought land reforms, better wages, and more social services. Their vision was one of a more equitable society where the wealth was distributed more fairly. The conservatives, who were supported by the rich and powerful, wanted things to stay the same. They believed in maintaining the status quo, which benefited the elite and landowners. Their resistance to change was a significant factor in the ongoing conflict. This fight made things very unstable. The political instability affected every aspect of life in Colombia, from the economy to social relations. The nation was deeply divided, and the scars of this period are still felt today. The legacy of La Violencia is a reminder of the dangers of political polarization and the importance of finding common ground. On April 9, 1948, Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, a popular liberal leader who spoke up for the poor, was shot and killed in Bogotá in the middle of the day. This was a huge shock for Colombia and started 10 years of violence and political trouble. This time was also called La Violencia, No one really knows for sure who killed Gaitan, but everyone knew what happened after. It made people angry and caused even more violence, and hundreds of thousands of people died. La violencia hurt Colombia badly. Millions of people had to leave their homes and families were torn apart. There were no laws because armed groups fighting for political reasons and power were everywhere. This made it easy for criminals to do what they wanted, and that helped people like Pablo Escobar become powerful. A young Pablo Escobar saw all of this happening. He saw how there were no rules and how some people had all the power. All this violence would help him build his own empire. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia. He grew up poor and saw how unfair things were in Colombia. He wanted a better life and to escape being poor. Even when he was young, Escobar was good at business, but he didn't care about the law. He started out stealing and smuggling small things like cigarettes and even tombstones. Even though these crimes weren't huge, they showed how ambitious Escobar was and that he would do anything to make money. As Escobar got older, his crimes got bigger. He started stealing cars, kidnapping people, and even stealing dead bodies to sell to medical schools. These terrible things made Escobar richer and more powerful. Because he was successful at these crimes, Escobar thought he was too smart for the law. He had a group of loyal friends who helped him, and many of them became important people in his drug business later on. By the early 1970s, Escobar was rich and powerful from his crimes, but he knew he could make even more money. He realized that the drug trade was where the real money was. This was a big change for Escobar, and it's when he started to become a major criminal. He saw how much people in the United States wanted cocaine, and that's what made him super rich and powerful. Escobar set up a system to send cocaine from Colombia to the United States. He paid off police and politicians, got rid of his enemies, and used violence to control everything about the drug trade. He was ruthless and ambitious. Escobar became incredibly rich and powerful. Everyone called him El Patron, which means the boss, and his Medellín cartel became the biggest drug organization in the world. He was so powerful that he even controlled some of the politicians, judges, and police in Colombia. Escobar's time as a powerful criminal happened at the same time the United States was fighting a war on drugs. This was a period marked by intense efforts from the US government to curb the influx of illegal substances into the country. The Reagan administration in particular launched aggressive campaigns to combat drug abuse and trafficking, which were seen as major threats to American society. The US spent a lot of money trying to stop drug trafficking, and that made things dangerous for Escobar. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, ramped up its operations targeting major drug cartels and their leaders. This international pressure forced Escobar to adopt more violent and desperate measures to protect his empire. He fought back by hurting politicians, journalists, and anyone who tried to stop him. Escobar's reign of terror included numerous assassinations and bombings aimed at silencing his critics and instilling fear. His targets were not limited to Colombia. He also threatened international figures who opposed his operations. Escobar's violence shocked the world. His brutal tactics drew widespread condemnation and brought global attention to the drug crisis. International media covered his violent acts extensively, highlighting the far-reaching impact of his criminal activities. He fought a bloody war against the Colombian government and its people because he wanted to stay in power. The Colombian government, with support from the US, launched military operations to dismantle his cartel. These clashes often resulted in heavy casualties and widespread destruction, further destabilizing the region. Medellín became a very dangerous place and many innocent people were killed. The city, once known for its vibrant culture, turned into a battleground. Escobar's influence permeated every aspect of life in Medellín, making it one of the most dangerous cities in the world during his reign. The local population lived in constant fear as violence and crime became a daily reality. Pablo Escobar's time of terror ended on December 2, 1993, when he was killed in a fight with the Colombian police. But even though he's gone, his actions still affect Colombia today. Escobar's story is a warning about what can happen when people want power and money too much, and it shows how dangerous the drug trade is. He left behind a lot of violence, destruction, and sadness. His story reminds us of the difficult problems Colombia has faced, and how powerful greed and violence can be.
Cocaine, derived from the leaves of the Erythroxylum coca plant, was mainly produced in South America, particularly in Peru, which was the leading producer. Initially used as a natural stimulant akin to coffee, it was discovered that processing the leaves could yield a substance far more potent. Let me provide you with a mini course on cocaine production and exportation to avoid detection. First, mix dried coca leaves with chemicals like kerosene and benzene until it becomes a paste. Then, combine this paste with materials such as acetone to create a white powder. Congratulations! You've just entered the world of drug dealing. You would need 350 kilograms of coca leaves to produce 1 kilogram of cocaine. If you purchase those leaves from Peru for $380, you can sell the cocaine in Colombia for $800. But wait, it gets better. Once smuggled into the US, you could sell that cocaine for around $2,200. If smugglers successfully transport the cocaine to the US for distribution, the price could soar to $15,000 per kilogram. In major US cities, that price could reach as high as $100,000 per kilogram. To summarize, what you could buy in Colombia for $1,000 could be sold for $100,000 in the US. This means if you controlled that supply chain, you were well on your way to ruling the world. A former FBI agent pointed out that such immense profits could ignite fierce wars among drug dealers, rivaling mafia conflicts. Here's where Pablo Escobar's brilliance shone through. Instead of engaging in classic drug wars like Tony Montana, he established a corporate structure, a drug empire, a massive, organized entity capable of managing trafficking of such scale. This entity would become known as the cartel. Its objective was to control, organize, and distribute a specific product. In a way or another, that enabled those entities to control their price, so they could achieve the highest possible profit. In 1976, Escobar took this great business idea and formed the Medellín cartel, allowing him to fully control cocaine trafficking. Because he was loyal to his friends, he made them join him. They were the Colombian equivalent of Vincent, Neil, and Chris. Together, they formed a brilliant product chain. Guys, look, we're going to import the cocaine paste from Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador. Here's the plan. We'll import the cocaine paste, then we'll attend the Copa America round of 16, where the teams that got knocked out early are Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. After that, we'll cook the cocaine in Colombia's forests. We have prepared labs in our country to process everything. Following that, we'll smuggle this stuff to the US by all possible means, like airplanes, submarines, go-fast boats, tuk-tuks, pregnant women. We'll try every possible means to smuggle it in. What if they become an obstacle for us? We'll create underground smuggling tunnels between the US and Mexico. Anything that can't be smuggled above ground can be moved underground. Wait, dear friend, doesn't this country have laws? He imported the stuff, set up labs, and exported, yet no one asked him for his ID. How did he build such an empire and amass all this money without being caught? You were just envious and he got caught. What? On May 19, 1976, Pablo Escobar and many of the cartel members were captured while returning from Ecuador with 18 kilograms of raw cocaine. Of course, he claimed he was innocent and that it was a trap. I'm saying 18 kilograms of cocaine. Who could orchestrate such a trap? My friend Pablo got captured, but like any great businessman and powerful kingpin, Pablo Escobar had police officers on his payroll. He bribed them to remain unaware, or even better, to help him. So it was normal for him to bribe an officer with 20 pesos when caught. The problem was that this officer refused the bribe to let him go, so he tried offering 100 pesos to be released. However, this time he was surprised that all of the officers rejected his bribe, and he was shocked to find himself in prison. But eventually, he got out of prison. Dear friend, how did he get out if the officers refused the bribe? The judge accepted it, my friend. Pablo bribed the judge responsible for his case and was released. When he got out, he ordered the assassination of all the officers who captured him. This was a message to any officer that might dare to challenge Pablo Escobar and refuse his bribe. According to Robert, Pablo's brother, this incident established a principle called money or bullets. In slang, it means accept the pesos or be taken out, by any means. This principle became fundamental in Pablo Escobar's empire. Any authority that disrupted Pablo's activities either took money or bullets. Thus, Pablo was able to dominate trafficking, reaping enormous profits while limiting the police to two columns: ally or victim. At that time, the problem was that an enemy emerged against Pablo Escobar, who was far greater than the Colombian police. This enemy was the United States of America. In the late 70s, the US noticed a flood of drugs coming from Colombia, and what they were trying to reduce turned into a massive market. There was a surplus of drugs in the United States coming from Colombia. My friend, the trafficking movement became highly active. In 1978, for example, Pablo Escobar decided with his friend Carlos later to establish a new shipping point to the US on Norman's Cay Island in the Bahamas. This island is just 350 kilometers away from Florida. It had an airport, hotel, port, and a large storage facility for cocaine. In short, it was a full drug franchise on the American coast.
However, the Americans noticed that whenever the Colombian police caught drug dealers red-handed, they managed to escape unscathed. At that moment, the US decided to take matters into their own hands. In 1979, US President Carter signed an agreement with Colombian President Julio Cesar. This agreement allowed for the extradition of Colombian drug dealers to the United States for prosecution, which caused anxiety for Pablo Escobar. If we looked at him in 1980, we wouldn't find a smuggler or hiding criminal with a warehouse turned den filled with burnt tires and malnourished addicts. He didn't look like a fugitive. He appeared as a public figure everyone knew, who could be seen freely. Do you mean Pablo the drug dealer? Blow the drug. He was residing at Hacienda Napoles, a palace spanning more than 20 square kilometers, known as Escobar's Paradise. He always stayed there, having everything: a helipad, a bull ring, and a full zoo. My friend, imagine being in your palace surrounded by all that, while the police were being bribed by you. People were blissful because of you, and society looked up to you as their idol. Then another country's government decided to send its agencies to take you out of your paradise and place you in a notorious American prison. Pablo declared, "No, over my dead body! I don't care about any agreements. I won't leave this place." However, he truly needed political influence. The parliament was the only institution that could protect him from being pursued and allow him to buy enough votes to repeal the extradition agreement. Moreover, political influence would elevate him to the status of an elite figure, rather than just a wealthy man who made money from nothing. Despite all his wealth, he didn't feel like one of the elite. In 1981, a gang called M19 abducted a woman named Martha Ochoa and demanded a huge ransom for her release. Martha wasn't just anyone. She was the sister of the Ochoa brothers. Those two brothers were key partners in establishing Pablo Escobar's cartel. M19 figured, why not target his daily income of $1 million? Despite all his riches, Escobar refused to pay, believing that accepting the blackmail would ruin the reputation he had built over years. Pablo formed an organization with his allies called Death to the abductors, aiming to track and eliminate M19 members. After they killed more than 100 people suspected of involvement in the abduction, M19 decided to release Martha. This was how Pablo Escobar emerged as a hero against criminals, achieving the justice the government couldn't. In 1982, he officially became a member of parliament, yet this membership didn't last long. Dear friend, this was a smart plan. He revamped his image. Instead of being a criminal in people's eyes, he became a symbol fighting extinction, planting trees, and also managed to evade the US. It seems he succeeded while spreading happiness by distributing drugs to Colombians. Being a parliament member didn't last long because of this wise man, the Minister of Justice and Law, in 1983. Since new leaders are often strict, Rodrigo led a significant campaign declaring Escobar a drug dealer, criminal and killer, arguing it was shameful for him to be among politicians. He sought to remove Escobar from parliament. Pablo Escobar didn't take this lightly. He received the news with a smile and in April 1984 decided to end Mr. Rodrigo Bonilla's life forever. The assassination of Bonilla was a turning point in Colombia. The government didn't just declare war on Escobar and his cartel, it also sought to enforce the extradition agreement with the US. They sought help from a stronger ally, the US. Escobar felt betrayed because his homeland Colombia would surrender him to another country. We were both criminals. Why does a third party interfere? Escobar was disappointed with his country. We're Colombians, we share the same borders, history, homeland, feelings and crimes. Escobar felt ashamed that his country would betray him. Nevertheless, he returned to his well-known motto, money or bullets. Forbes magazine ranked Escobar as one of the world's richest men in the 80s for 7 consecutive years. Despite all his power and wealth, in 1987 a shocking event occurred when Carlos Lerta, the underboss of the cartel, was captured after a manhunt was launched against him with the assistance of the US. At that time, Pablo Escobar faced his worst nightmares as the law was enforced against Carlos, leading to the extradition agreement. Carlos was extradited to the US and sentenced to life in prison. Consequently, Carlos decided to cooperate with US authorities in exchange for a reduction in his punishment. As long as none of my friends helped, I'd report them. This cooperation provided crucial information about the Medellín cartel. Thus, the combination of megalomania, power and fury elevated Pablo Escobar's reaction to a horrifying new level. On August 18, 1989, Pablo Escobar ordered the assassination of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán. My dear friend, if Luis became president, it would be Pablo's nightmare because he supported the extradition agreement, with drug control as the foundation of his campaign. Escobar succeeded in assassinating him. Another candidate, Cesar Gaviria, emerged to continue Galan's campaign. Gaviria tried to maintain the course, to the point that Pablo Escobar attempted to assassinate him as well. However, this attempt was not just another ordinary attempt, it was one of the most heinous crimes committed by Pablo Escobar. On November 27, 1989, Pablo Escobar orchestrated a booby-trapped flight that Cesar Gaviria was on from Bogotá to Cali. Just minutes after takeoff, the civilian plane exploded, resulting in the deaths of 107 innocent people. All were killed except for one person. Who, dear friend? Gaviria himself. How did that happen? Simply because he heeded his advisor and traveled overland instead of flying. This incident did not merely provoke the government to act against Escobar as before. It marked a turning point where Colombians began to oppose Escobar. They no longer viewed him as a mere corrupt drug dealer or the patriotic figure resisting US interference, but rather as a terrorist, someone who sacrificed hundreds for his own interests. As a result, Colombia became a battlefield between cartels and the state. In December 1989, Escobar bombed the headquarters of the Administrative Department of Security, or DAS, in Bogotá. 1 month after Gaviria became president, Escobar abducted the daughter of a former Colombian president to pressure the government into repealing the extradition agreement. Gaviria witnessed his country descending into chaos, prompting him on July 4, 1991, to draft a new constitution that included significant changes. The foremost change was repealing the extradition agreement with foreign countries. The second was to negotiate with Colombia's most notorious criminal, Pablo Escobar. After numerous discussions, Escobar agreed to Gaviria's terms and decided to surrender to the Colombian government, but under one condition. He wanted to enter the prison he desired. He had particular tastes. No, my dear friend, he took it a step further. He insisted on constructing his prison, known as La Catedral, or the Cathedral. Escobar negotiated with the government, refused foreign intervention, and named the prison he built the Cathedral. He designed it as a palace overlooking Medellín, difficult for any external party to penetrate. Inside this palace, Escobar lived the luxurious life he was accustomed to, with bars, a jacuzzi, and guest rooms. Imagine, my friend, visiting someone in prison only for them to feed you and invite you to stay overnight. You could enjoy drinks, soak in the jacuzzi, socialize, and feel at ease. After all, we're in prison. If you recall the episode of The Wise One, When I briefly mentioned Escobar, you'd know there was a soccer field in his prison, not merely for entertainment but also for a league held there. Dear friend, I have a question from the outset of the episode. Where was the Colombian government? I noticed they were a bit slow. The government accepted not to intervene. As long as they weren't incurring any costs from this foolishness, they had nothing to lose. Even the prison security was hired and paid by Pablo Escobar. Some theorists referred to Escobar's deal with the government as the worst plea agreement in legal history. The guilty party faced no punishment. He was in a place he called a prison, living comfortably as if he merely relocated, running his gang from within. Violence, the very reason for the president's surrender, continued unabated. In 1991, over 25,000 were killed, and in 1992 that number rose to 27,000. That same year, Pablo Escobar received 2 individuals from the cartel in the prison. However, suspecting they had stolen money, he tortured them in his cathedral until they died and buried them within the prison walls. To be honest, I don't know how much they stole, but I know that rats alone consume $7 million a day. So whatever they took, it wasn't a significant loss. This incident, along with the violence in Colombia, stirred public opinion and led many to question, where was Pablo Escobar? This encouraged the government to transfer him from the cathedral to a legitimate prison. Escobar anticipated this news, aware that the transfer would bring him closer to his worst fear, extradition to the US. Therefore, he famously declared, "I prefer to be in a grave in Colombia than in a jail cell in the United States." On June 22, 1992, Colombian forces executed his transfer order, only to discover that the prisoner had gone missing. Pablo Escobar had escaped. How did he manage that? He built the prison, so naturally, he considered the possibility of an escape. He dug tunnels beneath the prison to facilitate his getaway. This illustrates that no matter how powerful you are, you must always stay 2 steps ahead. The government declared a state of emergency and sought assistance from the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, established by Nixon. The DEA provided the Colombian government with surveillance and monitoring devices. This equipment helped locate Escobar and trained an elite team called the Search Block, equipping them with the latest weaponry. At that point, Pablo Escobar was in his final chapter. The entire world was hunting him. The Colombian army and police were after him. The fiercest US department sought him, and both the people and rival gangs despised him, all chasing after Pablo Escobar. Normal citizens formed a civil group known as Los Pepes, funded by Escobar's competitors and former associates. This group attacked Escobar's cartel and destroyed many of their assets. In summary, the police, the army, the people, the US, and rival gangs were all pursuing Pablo Escobar. He was a fugitive for 18 months, during which he lost his wealth, influence, and most of his aides, unable to protect even his family. The government prevented them from traveling and sheltered them in a secret hotel, recognizing them as prime targets for Escobar's adversaries. On December 2, 1993, Pablo called his son Juan. Like any old classic Arabic film, the call lasted quite a while, enabling Colombian forces to track him using the devices they received from the US. Inside a modest house in Los Olivos, Medellín, Pablo Escobar was surrounded and began leaping from one roof to another, desperately trying to escape. However, my friend, just as our story began with 3 bullets that killed Jorge Elica Gaitan, igniting violence in Colombia, it concluded with 3 bullets that ended Pablo Escobar's life, 2 in his body and 1 in his head. You may think the story ends here, but the 3rd bullet that struck his head, specifically behind his ear, ignited an endless debate. Did that bullet come from the Colombian police? Or did Escobar shoot himself to fulfill his final objective? That no one would kill Pablo Escobar except for Pablo Escobar. He upheld his belief that a grave in Colombia was preferable to a prison cell in the US. However, my dear friend, regardless of who fired the 3rd bullet, it was the shot that took Pablo Escobar's life and ended the reign of the most infamous drug lord in history. My friend, if we were to cut and visit Medellín today, we would find Escobar present, but not in the way you might expect. After concluding our story, allow me to share an article published in 2022 titled Pablo Escobar, The Legacy. Many residents of Medellín still remember Pablo Escobar, not as the criminal and terrorist he was at death or as the person who destroyed their country and lives, but as a hero for whom museums, t-shirts and murals have been established. He is often referred to by his nickname, Pablito. This is for a good reason. Despite Escobar's criminal exploits, he invested millions in Medellín's infrastructure. He built hospitals, water, and electricity networks. He even constructed a neighborhood for the homeless named Barrio Escobar. He created recreational spaces, including soccer pitches and skating rinks. These properties still exist and remain beneficial to the community. This led many residents to view him not as a criminal or drug dealer, but as the Colombian version of Robin Hood, an individual who supported a government that neglected the people, outsmarted the wealthy in Colombia and the US, and brought foreign currency to his country. He built hospitals, neighborhoods, recreational facilities, and utilities. He corrupted American youth to enhance the living conditions of Colombians. The legend of Pablo Escobar transcended the borders of Colombia after the release of the Netflix series Narcos, produced in 2015. Following this series, Medellín welcomed thousands of tourists from Europe.